We want to keep this story going as well as try to provide you as much context as we can. So I want to bring in our next guest to help guide us through this moment. Scott Duffey, former FBI agent, joining us now on Live Now from Fox. And Scott, unfortunately, we're talking about a new school year and still the same issues that we have seen in the past with school shootings.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. Thanks for having me on. Yes, as a matter of fact, today was the first school day for my senior. And so for many across the nation, whether it be this week post Labor Day or just a few weeks prior, this is a brand new school year, which is supposed to be filled with all the joys and of course all the nerves that go with being in school. But yet so early in a school year, perhaps first day for many there that we have yet another tragic school shooting.
Yes, no doubt about that. And let's talk a little bit about from the law enforcement perspective, when they get a call or multiple calls about reports of shots fired in a high school, if you can just give us some insight on what that is and what that response looks like coming onto a class of about 2,000 students.
Yeah, so this is a good size high school. And regardless of the size, the protocols and the training practices are going to be very similar for law enforcement, both federal, state, and local. So in a situation like this, and the unit of where this is a repeated act throughout the year, law enforcement has learned and learned so much from its mistakes and as well as putting in best practices. So when you have a school shooting, a report of a shooting, a lockdown, et cetera, you have local law enforcement. If there's not already a school resource officer in place, you definitely have local law enforcement that is probably on scene within minutes, if not seconds. And then, of course, there is that ripple effect where their federal partners are equally called. And so that means any uniformed officer, any officer with a with means of communication is responding to the school. This is not, oh, that's not my jurisdiction. This is all hands on deck. And as I already saw that the FBI was en route and probably already on scene. So you're talking about um, as officers begin to arrive, they are immediately stacking up. And what I mean by stacking up, as soon as there are 2, 3, 4, 5 officers, that's a team that's going into the school and addressing the threat. They're not waiting outside. And then, of course, as casualties have been reported, those that are first responders are there to stop the threat. And so if the active shooting is still taking place, those officers are going to move quickly to the sound of that gunfire and then deal with the threat as they see fit. And then, of course, you have your first aid that is setting up in a outside perimeter, waiting for the all clear by law enforcement that the active shooter has ceased. And so now everyone responding in to care for the injured and just as you can imagine, it's chaos with parents, staff, children, just trying to do what they've been trained, and that is that run, hide, fight, which is if you can run, get out of there. If you can't, it's hide. And at the last resort, fight. And that is the last resort. And so federal, state, and local partners, no matter where in the United States, are receiving very similar training and are enacting that training, putting it into place.
And Scott, let's talk a little bit about how the police response has changed throughout the years. Let's go from 1999 to today. In 1999, I'm talking about Columbine. We saw a much different response, almost waiting until you don't hear the shots anymore. And what is that perspective like now as we go back all these years? How has that changed?
Yeah. So of course, Columbine, and it had played out in the news for weeks with the aftermath. This was something somewhat new, not the first, but definitely uh, of its nature, where you had many casualties, and the school reacted in such a way that this was something that was fairly new for the nation. So, what did it do for law enforcement? Law enforcement did what it did back then. Ultimately, you wait. If the shooter were to come out, you would address the shooter. But the training back then was officers would be arriving, they would be assessing the scene. They would be holding that scene until these elite units, SWAT or some sort of similar type of training squadron, comes in and deals with the threat. And so those were the old days. Those were the days pre Columbine, and then Columbine, as a result, changed that, where law enforcement, um, from federal, state, and local across the board, said we can't do that. We cannot wait until our tactical experts come. We have to train, because each and every officer that carries a weapon should be able to deal with a threat and not wait for backup and so forth. And so these new training, alert training, Alice training, it is that run, hide, fight for the sake of any kid that is and staff member involved in the school. But then for law enforcement across the nation, I receiving it way back in mid 2000s, where this training is, hey, no matter what you do, you are make sure that you have visible, if you're, let's say you're not a uniformed police officer, you're someone who's a detective or plainclothes, you're given these sashes or anything outside to show that you are law enforcement, so you avoid friendly fire. And as officers are arriving, they could be strangers, they could be different departments, not officers that usually train with each other. And so but they've all had this similar training, so they know to, as soon as they're a couple of numbers, 2, 3, 4, or 5 officers, and that's within seconds, if not minutes, that way they are going into the school and looking for and listening for sound of gunfire, address that threat, remove that threat, determine what other threats that may exist. And then of course, then you have the outer perimeters and so forth, the first aid that are then able to come and deal with the injured, and um as an orderly process as possible of removing students from that school, because it's a very active crime scene. And so law enforcement throughout decades now are pretty much all trained in this similar training. So that way, it's not like East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, wherever have you, officers know, hey, I got to deal with the threat, and I'm not going to wait much longer. So as soon as a couple are there, they're moving in quickly. And so that, and it's an annual training, to where officers know they don't have much time during an active shooter. An active shooter is indiscriminately shooting, and so thereby must be dealt with swiftly.
Scott, I also want to show our viewers here. Let's go out full while I have you. And we were just seeing, just moments ago while we were talking, some more images of people being loaded up into ambulances. Still a very fluid scene and active at this high school. And I have to mention, as Scott, just as we're talking about how things have changed throughout the years, also technology as well. My friend is in the ATF and always told me this story. It talked about he was at Columbine, after the scene and after the horrific nature of that. He was also at the shooting years later at the movie theater, and just how many years removed from that. But what has changed was when he was in that movie theater, when the bodies were still there, you had all of those people that still had their cell phones, and so many people were trying to call and check on their loved ones. And in Columbine, obviously, you didn't have that because the cell phones just weren't prominent for high schoolers back then. But now it is just so different. And what that must be for law enforcement to have to hear that, knowing that that person is gone, but that loved one is still trying to hold on to hope.
Yeah. So, today's day and age, it is just about everybody at a very young age has been afforded a cell phone. And so that cell phone is a lifeline. And I know schools across the nations are dealing with cell phones with regards to, hey, let's not put our children on cell phones at the time that they should be learning. Absolutely. There should be some sort of protocols in place that remove that cell phone from being a distraction. But like today, it's a reminder to all of us that cell phones, no matter where we go, are important. They're important to law enforcement because it's instant information. If you have a child that is able to get on that cell phone during an active shooter, that child could be calling a parent, that child could be calling 911. Either way, if it's a phone call out or a text, that is instant information that can get into a 911 center, get to law enforcement to say, hey, we have a shooter that's at this classroom or this hallway, et cetera. So you have the positives in this regard that allow law enforcement to be able to utilize that technology, especially with reverse 911 calls, being able to send out information to the public about a lockdown, that information that just sent out nationwide about anything, especially today, this horrible tragedy of another school shooting, where the information goes out within seconds. But then, of course, we see on the other side where you have victims that are deceased, that are not able to escape. And it is that, you have parents that are calling in as no different than I would be if all of a sudden I were to hear of something, and if my son or daughter are not at home, I'd be texting, I would be calling, I would be trying to figure out where they are they safe? And so then you just have those echoes of those calls for the unfortunate that have not made it. So it is amazing what technology plays in today's world with regards to mass shootings, school shootings, and other tragedies, and but can offer so much more to getting law enforcement to where they need to go.
Yeah, so true and so vital during this very tense time for so many of the family members and loved ones for their students at this high school. Scott, let's talk a little bit about the FBI and their role. Obviously, we heard that they are coming to the scene, maybe already at the scene. Talk a little bit about when they come, the federal partners, as well as assisting the local boots on the ground, if you will, and how that is all coordinated once FBI arrives.
Yeah. So the initial call out is that anyone with a weapon who can respond is going to respond. Nobody is going to be sitting at their desk. As long as you heard that there is a mass shooting, it is a national call out. Whoever is available and equipped will be responding. So now that you have the aftermath, you have where law enforcement has dealt with the threat. In this case, from what I'm hearing, someone in custody. You are also dealing with the staff. You're dealing with 1,900 thereabout students that need to be evacuated, and so you need to remove everyone from the scene because it is a crime scene. And so the FBI, which has been afforded pretty much to be the primary for mass attacks such as these, they are equipped with the resources second to none with regards to their crime scene techs. As a former member of the FBI's evidence response team, the ERT, they are there. They've trained all over the world. They've responded all over the world to all sorts of terrorist criminal acts against U.S. citizens, both abroad and within the United States. that they are equipped to be able to handle such a massive crime scene. Because it is not only, remember, an active shooter is quickly going in, causing the most damage, indiscriminately shooting, could be going in and out of classrooms. So that's alone a massive crime scene. That the whole school is going to have to be photographed to determine where and the shooter or shooters have been. And then, of course, you're talking about witness accounts, everyone that has saw something, heard something, took a picture of something. They're going to have to be tracked down and interviewed. And then, of course, you'll have a secondary crime scene, and that's most likely where the shooter left from. And so, did the shooter leave his or her home armed with whatever they're intending to go to the school with? That's a secondary, and so resources will be allocated there. And then, of course, you're talking about the technology with regards to analysis, digital analysis of the shooter's phones, laptop, use of computers, both at home and in school, because ultimately now you have to figure out the why. How long has this been in preparation? And has this person been in contact with anybody that is not just hearing the information, but could be considered to be a co conspirator, perhaps egging this person on or being some sort of a complicit associate to figure out, will additional arrests need to be made. So it is a massive undertaking, and the FBI is well equipped to provide those resources to be able to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, it's such a very fluid time and so many things to take into account. And we'll be waiting for more updates from law enforcement. No doubt there'll be a news briefing a little bit later. As soon as that happens, we'll bring it to everyone's attention. But Scott Duffey, thanks so much for joining us on Live Now from Fox and giving us some great perspective and insight on this really unfortunate case that we are seeing out in Georgia play out.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.